Dictionary doesn't give a much differentiation between known and realized. Known is what you're born with. You're known, you don't need to learn it. Realized is a deep, it's a deep knowing, but it's not, you're not born, it's not a conscious thought, it's a subconscious thought. So it's a deeper, realization is deeper knowing, but not in the conscious sense until it's realized. And it might just be like a cloud, like the Google Cloud, where memory that has been lost, never thought of on this planet, or has been thought of, forgotten, or somebody might have said it, or realized before, but nobody else did, and then they died, and it's still around. Just because a person died, and not just because they didn't write it down, doesn't mean that thought doesn't still exist. You can't, once a thought is created, or not created, once a thought is compiled, once a thought, not created, but once a bunch of stuff compiled together to create a thought, through whether it's a realization, a knowing, a learning experience, and all of those combined to make a thought, and not necessarily, people a lot of times think that a thought would be where somebody just says something. You can't say something and claim you thought it. And you can't, and thought is not always, just because you have something, a possible, I don't know, it would be not a realization, but a lot of people think they think from just having stuff run through their head. Because when you're born until you die, you have stuff run through your head. Now, whether you realize it, know it, acknowledge it, have the ability to speak it, is all differentiated on basically your path through life. If your path is an architect, and you're not a religious person, you don't think about religion, then you could have a lot of religious thought, well, not necessarily in this religious thought running through your head, but you don't think it, you don't realize it. And you might gather this, that, and the other from it. Say, you might study cubits, because cubits is an ancient form of measurement, and it's basically through Egyptian and how they did measure in like religious text and stuff. So that could be something that you use, but you don't realize the religion. Although religion's so big, it's hard to say that would never be thought of, even no matter what you are. Even if you're the largest criminal, you're going to hear about religion. You're going to drive by a church. You're not going to just drive by a church and go, oh well, not think about that, not think about a cross, not think about all the stuff. I mean, TV, it's all over the place. Just like politics, you can't say that you don't think, you haven't thought about politics or crime or any other thing where people say, oh, I was raised, I never knew about religion. Oh, come on, were you locked in a closet your whole life, fed porridge and beer, and then beaten by a sadistic mother? It's so the difference between knowing and realization and thought, and then and not necessarily turned into spoken word or written word, because basically it all comes from humans are standing up. Therefore, we're not as old as, say, animals that like walk on all fours, which they have walk on all fours, saying that there are things like birds and stuff that walk upright. And basically, everything is gathered through thought. Okay, your eyes see stuff, but this what you see has already been created. Flight, everything that you see has already been created. Unless you're, even if you're, well, not just if or even if, but even if you're seeing things, visualizing things, hallucinating, all that stuff. Even though this, I don't know. I looked into all the psychiatry and all that stuff of what they were studying, how they were studying, and all the stuff. That's the reason I never went to school, because I figured, well, if I'm going to go to school and pay $70,000 to $100,000 for an education that they don't know all the stuff about the subject, and they're still studying, which is why doctors are practicing, because there's still stuff they don't know. Why pay $70,000 to $100,000 on stuff they don't know? If I could read a book about it, why would I want to pay $70,000 to $100,000? And even that, all you're doing, basically, medicine is you're studying what body parts and all that stuff, like nerve system, blood, anyway. So to get it, I got off on the subject. Anyway, to get into for it to be spoken, your mind is on top of your head. That's the first thing. Is what everything is, like the filter, and then it passes through. Your eyes are the next level. Basically, your mind is your intelligence. The next, and it goes down through intelligence. Your eyes are the next intelligence, and then your senses, and your mouth is below those three. So it's like fourth in line for or fifth in line, because it's basically you use a mouth to eat, and your vocal cords are below what you eat. So your speech is below what you eat, and if you eat animals, then you're lower. What you say is lower on the intelligence level than an animal. And then it goes down to your heart, and all this stuff was created at different times, like your heart, and the first thing. I'm not saying the mind was the first thing created. It might have been in a sense where something was affected, which, like say the first thing created by plants that had, of course, plants. If you saw them in a certain place, they're gonna, it's gonna, of course, it's being that it's arterial movement up a tree. Where they pull it up the tree through heating up the environment and stuff, that they pull the water and stuff up through the tree. And if you cut that, it's basically, you can say the cambium is like an arterial movement where it's pulling it up through a system. And it's just a simpler form, or you could say that it's a more complex form. And the more complex you get, the more simpler the system is. Because, well, it's hard to explain that, because saying something simple is more complex than what is complex, then it would be it'd be almost saying like, well, that's a backward statement, or you're just vice versa in the situation to make a point that isn't even a point. But in actuality, if you think about it, they have had to become simplified but more complex through how they where they grow, how they grow, and all the different places that plants grow, and all the different kind of plants that have evolved to grow in different situations better than other plants. Say an oak tree compared to something that grows, like a weed that'll grow in a crevice. Oak trees aren't going to grow in the mountains, up in the high, at the tree line of mountains. So, anyway, so when you speak, when you hear someone speak, and and you might have heard it for the first time, and they're saying that they just thought that up and are speaking it, the only way that they can be speaking it and claiming they're thinking it is by which I've never seen. I've only seen people that thought where it's where they speak, is where they have practiced it or routined it or rehearsed it, read it through, and studied it over and over and over until they can speak it and say, and that way, it's also that they've spoken so much that they don't even have to think about it, and their words, it'll be, so what they've studied is basically, what is that word where it's rhetoric, where rhetoric is where it's been spoken about so many times, like a lot of things that are, like, say, books and stuff, are a lot of educational books are rhetoric because they've been studied, but they don't give you the steps in what they've studied. They don't start at the beginning of the thought of what built up to what they're now saying. Say how to drink a glass of water. Not saying that's scientific, but saying you have to first find the water. Well, and then you have to find a glass to put the water in, and then you have to know if the water's filtered or not. Anyway, but if rhetoric means they went through all the steps to drink it, and the guy is going to start in the book saying you drink a glass of water instead of going through all the steps. Now, not saying that that's scientific, not saying that's how it is. I'm just saying that's the simplest form and quickest thing I can think of right away. Is that a lot of educational books, the reason people don't understand them is because they've never heard what you're talking about before. Not saying drinking a glass of water. They've never heard what's being taught, or they've never thought about it, what's being taught. And so the people say kids with parents that have gone to college and universities, those parents are going to learn, they know what brought them up. Well, not all of them, but they know, a lot of them know how to pass along, or they will pass along their education to their kids. Now, people that are selfish they're not that intelligent, and they want to keep everything to themselves. They don't want to pass anything on because they've lost, not lost their mind, but they don't want to give to their kids. They just want to traditionalize them, so they don't give them they'll just traditionalize them, which puts them the kid at a loss from the parent not wanting to teach them. They just kind of hand them to a system and let the system raise them. Where an educated person knows that the system isn't right, and there's a lot of stuff you have to learn after the education system. That's where a lot of parents, through if their kid does follow, or if they know that their kid is following the right course, or they brought if their kid, and there's also if their kid is going to learn that way. If their best acknowledgement of studies, or the best way that a parent can look at their kid and say, okay, they are attracted to this subject and they aren't attracted to this subject. So you can tell by the way what they're interested in when they're young, and you can develop an interest in something by a lot of parents, they'll say, well, they give a simple example of something, say how to inflate a tire, and the kid's not interested in how to inflate a tire. They might be thinking rocket science, but they're not thinking how to inflate a tire. Now, a parent that knows the mechanical knowledge, instead of one that just says, well, I'm just going to give my kids a bunch of subject matter, a small sample subject matter here, and not explain why that's necessary, and not explain the needs, necessary needs for that reason for doing that. Just like tires, people think, well, if you work around, this is a basic thought until they're buying a set of tires, and then they're going to think differently. But if you're buying a set of tires for a car, you're thinking, well, it's just a set of tires, throw them on there, zip gun them on, and that's all I need, just a set of tires. And whoever puts tires on probably don't know that much about tires. Now, there probably are people that don't know much about tires. There are people who probably don't know much about cutting hair. There are people that probably don't know much about surgery. There are people who probably don't know much about a lot of stuff. But they get into it, and then what they study, like doctors and stuff, they might have studied, and they are able to obtain knowledge of the subject by what they study, but they don't have the realization to go off that study. All they know is that straight line what they've studied. They have no ability to go off that subject. Like somebody that was born through for that path of, say, being a doctor, who will say they'll be able to off think and say, okay, this all this other stuff combined could create this, and they're the ones that are going to be a better doctor than somebody who just studied it and just sticks to the line of, well, that's not what it says in the book. Like a lot of people, a lot of technical people, it doesn't really matter. Well, this is how I've done it for 20 years. I'm not going to change. That's traditionalization, even though it's educational traditionalization and not through your lineage, your parents and stuff. So what animals have done since they're walking on all fours is all these things. The mind is still above, say, a cow. The mind is still above the eyes and stuff, but they're not as a higher level or as much of differentiation as there is as a person walking upright, where it's more level, like the mind is not that far above the heart. So that's the reason animals have quicker reaction than humans. I mean, even if you have ever say the way movements are created, like a rabbit. People think that rabbits are thinking of their moves. A lot of that stuff comes from, it's not instinct, but it's their, they have it's not even a thought process. It's their eyes conceive, say, a movement or whatever it is, and that's why sometimes a rabbit will run straight at an object and then dart away. It's their nerves fire before their thought, which makes their muscles move before they have to think about it. Because if they thought about it, and the predator, which they're all animals, say a herd animal, they're all thinking about this. They're all thinking about the same thing. And then a predator moves into the area, and then even though they're a combined thought, that herd is a combined thought. And there might be individuals, they might wander off, and they might be like on a tangent of a thought, or of the whole combined thought. They're working as a group, and this is going off on a tangent to find the depth of that thought. Even though people don't, I don't care what people believe about animals. They claim they don't think because they don't read a book anyway, or they don't speak, or they don't speak to scientists in a controlled environment or whatever. So these fired auto-fire nerves are controlled, and then there might be a thought saying, okay, out of the back of my eye I see this, but if they think it, the predator being can read the thoughts of an animal. Now I know you think, well, now you're saying they're mind reader. That's impossible. I've never seen anything written about it. Yeah, it's because nobody ever says it, or they have, and they're afraid to be in this traditionalized educational system and all this stuff. And if they go off on a tangent like that, they'll be called crazy, and you can't say that. And even if they have discussed it with others, they'll say, well, you'll never be believed. The predator, I mean, if you see the reaction, even though you're saying that the split fire reaction of, say, a rabbit being followed by coyotes or whatever it is, foxes, in a run, and you can see that they have to sometimes the coyote, if they're rabbit, you can tell it doesn't happen all the time, because that's the reason when the prey, when they're running, it's all about, you can see, well, why did they turn that way? It's turned right into the predator. And it's not necessarily a thought that they thought that. It's just the way their system, it reacts without thought. So that's why that's why it's more of a chance when a prey is caught, is because their nerve reactions are the split second that they fire, their muscles take that into movement. And that's the reason you think, wow, that rabbit ran right toward that. You know, that wouldn't be a smart move in a prey animal. But that's what happens. They're not actually thinking that. It's just spark reactions into their nervous system that causes their muscles to spring into action. But anyway, the difference between realization and knowing. And I was thinking about this because of religion. You know, everybody says, well, we know there's a God. And you can't know something. I was not born with the thought of knowing it's not even feasible to say that there is a entity out there that created everything. Now, if they're saying entity and they're continually traditionalizing religion instead of saying, okay, there's something out there that formed everything, instead of saying there's someone, or the something is a God, instead of saying God is the unknown thing that everything is created from, which it's not one thing that everything was created from, because that would be saying that small, minute, if you take in the universe as nothingness in the beginning, where there's nothing but space. That's all there was, space. Nothing in it, no mass, light, electrons, gluons, any of that, any neutrinos, which comes from, photons or whatever that is. But none of that is in the nothingness of space. And so you can't say that something just formed. Our mind is not deep enough into even realization of what it could be. Since space is infinity.